Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be showing you out the windshield of my car. I am very excited to be bringing to you live from the inside of my motor vehicle a conversation with the one and only. Okay. Request to join. I'm just looking for Stacy here. Don't request to join if you're not Stacy, please, because there's too many people in here who are not Stacy, and that's making it challenging for me, you little saboteurs. How do I find Stacy, per se? Not to suggest that in any way I don't want to speak to the rest of you, but at this moment, it's really Stacy that I'm trying to find. Okay. Well, I'm trying to sort this out. Here we go. Invite to join. I'm sorry, guys. This is what happens every single. Stacey.
Hello, hello.
The first 5 minutes of my Instagram live is just me fumbling around with technology like a Luddite buffoon.
I doubt that. More than likely, it is you trying to make certain you're familiarizing yourself with the tools of technology that are constantly being updated and ensuring that you create a seamless experience for your audience.
Thank you for clarifying that
See?
for everyone watching.
There you
Yeah.
go.
Um, Adding to my flusteredness here is that I was driving to a secure location, my home, that also has a copy of your book waiting for me. And the traffic here in Southern California was so bad that instead I am parked on the side of the road, speaking to you from the driver's seat.
Well, you're always in the driver's seat, Misha, so we'll just make it work from there.
You're really
And
good
I've
at
got a copy
staying.
of the book precariously perched on a weather based on a thermostat in the hotel that I'm in Winston-Salem, where I'm going to be doing book signings this weekend. And so, we can see it behind me, and eventually I will have my Vanna White like support system hand me the book and bring it closer. But we're good.
Good. Well, so lovely to see you, and thank you very much for gracing me and my Instagram with your presence. I've just been looking forward to this all week. It's so exciting to talk to you. Especially exciting to talk to you. We'll talk about your book in a minute, but it's especially exciting to talk to you in the lead up to this historic election.
Wait,
When
go ahead.
Yes. I'm excited to talk to you about what's happening on the ground in the lead up to this election, as well as your book. If you don't mind veering off into the weeds there a little bit. Um, what it occurred to me to ask you because people keep asking me this question, which is, what can I do aside from checking my own voter registration and making a voting plan and making sure that I turn out at the polls? What can I do to be most impactful in turning the tide of this election? And I thought maybe you would be uniquely positioned to offer some insight on that very question.
Well, I was about to make a joke about, wait, there's an election happening. I hadn't heard about it.
Oh,
But but
sorry.
I will.
I'm sorry I torpedoed that.
Well, hey, these things happen. So I would say there are three things we can always do. One is that once you verify your voting, make sure you verify for someone else. So it's going to be three V's. So verify. Not only verify that you're registered, that you have a plan to vote, make sure you verify that at least 5 people you know have done the same. Not the 5 people you're certain have, but the 5 people that you know are always kind of wobbly on this. So spouse, children, friends, that person who says, oh yeah, I'm going to vote, but when you ask, what are you voting for, they don't realize there's a presidential election. That person. So your first V is to verify and identify 5 people. They don't have to all live in your state. They can be 5 people but you want to verify that they are ready to go, because this is going to be an election of margin, like of minuscule inches. In Georgia, it was 11,719 votes. In Arizona, it was less than 11,000 votes. It was 10,000.
Right.
We know across the country, it's going to be really narrow. So verify. The second, oh, go ahead.
Stacey, I'm just going to interrupt for a second just to point out that probably by the time this video runs its course, more than 100,000 people will have watched this video, and if each one of those people recruits or verifies 5 additional people and make sure that they're verified, that they've got a voting plan, and that they know that they're registered, because as we both know, so many people have been purged from the rolls without even knowing it, or people forget to check their registration after they've moved, or there's a million things that can happen. But if if all of those people who are watching this video were to do that, that's 500,000 people, and for sure that is well within the margin that this election will be. So the people watching this video could turn the tide of the election.
Absolutely. That is, and thank you for inserting that, because that's why it's so critical. We don't just think about our immediate circle or our immediate state. This is a national election. And so even if you live in a state where the electoral college vote is already a given, we've got to have a Senate, we've got to have a House, but we also have to have governors and state legislators who are responsible for deploying all of the things we want President Harris and Vice President Walz to do. And so part of the importance of verification is that we also verify we're going all the way down the ballot. So that's number one. Number two is volunteer. Now you can say, I don't really like calling people. I don't like door knocking. There are lots of ways to volunteer. My personal favorite is to get people to go to fairfight.com/LFGV. Let's freaking go vote. In this case, it's let's freaking go volunteer. So we will sign you up to do the kind of canvassing you want to do, or help as a poll worker. We know that one of the tactics they're using this year on the other side is trying to undermine the integrity of elections by messing with the process, by going after election workers who are incredibly valuable members of this process and so often get the shortest shrift and the least amount of attention. They need help. They need help because their budgets have been cut. They need help because their lives have been threatened. They need help because there are a lot of us and there aren't that many of them. So we need to volunteer. So fairfight.com/LFGV. So verify, volunteer. And the third is visibility. We sometimes think we're talking about it too much. We're talking about the election too much. People are hearing, no, people aren't hearing enough. The other side is incredibly loud. They have an echo chamber. And too often we have, basically a vacuum. We whisper to each other what we're going to do, but they're proud of their terrible behavior. They're proud of, just think about what they've done to Springfield, Ohio. They are loud and wrong. We've got to be loud and right. We've got to be so loud and so right that those who do not see themselves in this conversation believe they should be invited in. Don't worry about being too pushy. You're not going to lecture people, but you are going to talk about why you're voting. And not because you want Harris and Walz, but because you want clean water, clean air, because women deserve bodily autonomy, because gun violence is a scourge, because we've got governors across this country that are letting children go hungry because they're too mean to take free money to feed poor children. We've got all kinds of issues, but people don't connect the dots unless we help them. And that means visibility. Talk about the issues and talk about why voting connects to those issues. So verify, volunteer, and be visible, and we get to victory.
I think you made just such a good point. There has been for a long time a stigma around talking about political issues because it can look pushy, or like you've got your agenda or you're trying to foist it on someone else, right? But the truth of the matter is, to not be engaged, to not care, and to not be passionate about these things is actually, that's the thing that people should be ashamed of, because these things really matter.
Yeah.
They really impact lives. They change the course of lives. they can at times mean the difference between going to war or not going to war, or being able to marry the person you want to or not being able to marry the person you want to, being having access to the health care and reproductive rights
Exactly.
that you are entitled to, or not having those rights and access. There are so many things that are critical and at times life and death touchstones for
Absolutely.
people, that to not be engaged and to not participate, that's the thing that people should be ashamed of. Not to guilt you if you're watching this, but I'm trying to guilt you a little bit. Um, Stacey, I think it would be I would be remiss if I didn't mention just a question that I think is on everyone's minds. What is it that you miss most about Supernatural?
Well, I'm looking at it. I mean, come on. The tortured life of Castiel and how he was friend, foe, and ally to the brothers, Dean and Sam, always in my heart. But it's the camaraderie. It was the storytelling. It was watching Baby. You know, seeing if Baby ever broke down. I mean, that was the most loved and well run. You know, 60. I think it's 67. You know, it
Yes,
was,
that's right.
yeah. I mean, so for me, it's being able to be a part of that world.
Yeah. Um, I I miss it too. Although I still get to hang out with Jared and Jensen quite a bit,
Show off.
and that's nice. I know I'm showing off. It's either that I'm showing off or I'm just sort of clinging to the vestiges
Yeah.
of my former glory, which might also be what's going on. Yeah.
Look, I'm talking to a poet, a cookbook author, someone who can sit on the side of the highway and still command the attention of thousands. Please, there's no former glory. You're still glorious.
Speaking of which, Stacey, you were nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize a few years ago. That's pretty impressive. You're probably the most important advocate of voting rights living in America today. You have such an esteemed resume, and it is such honestly, it's one of the great honors of my career just to have the opportunity to talk to you. So it's very exciting for me. You have speaking of this activism um, around elections, you have written a children's book, which I think is so lovely that I think will help inspire activism and instill a sense of civic possibility in a generation of children. So very much encourage everyone to pick up a copy of Stacey Speaks Up, which is a lovely book. I assume somewhat autobiographical, but I might be connecting more dots in there than I should be. But um, I'm not going to, spoiler alert. I'm going to reveal a little bit here,
It's okay.
but it's about a child seeing an injustice and taking action when it seems like the machines and the bureaucracy are putting up barriers and telling her no. And I think that that is such a lovely story to be sharing with children. And the book, I mean, I'm a bit of a softie, admittedly. The book made me tear up when I read it to my daughter, but it's exactly the kind of story that I want to be passing on to my kids. And my daughter is now 12, so she's like, Dad, come on, you're not going to read me a picture book. And then she was like, Oh, that was sweet. Um, but the truth is, it's a lovely story, and it's a story about how one person who cares and who takes action can make a big difference, and that's a message that we all need to be hearing. How did you come to tell this particular story? And also, this is your second children's book, is that right?
So actually, so this is it. Stacy Speaks Up, and it's actually the third,
It's a
and
third.
what we call yeah. It's so the first one is Stacy's Extraordinary Words, which is about perseverance and spelling bees. The second one was Stacy's Remarkable Books, which was about how we deserve to know the stories of our history, but also the stories of other cultures. And it's based on both are based on true stories. So one when I was in spelling bee in second grade, and I don't want to do a spoiler, but there's a tense outcome. And the second is about one of my best friends from elementary school who was part of the Vietnamese boat lift into southern Mississippi, and how we became friends and really learned about each other's cultures, but also learned about how to be better friends. And how to stand up to bullies. And so this one is Stacey Speaks Up. So in this one, Stacey and her friends discover that there's a classmate who can't afford lunch. And it's autobiographical in the sense that I knew kids like that in school, could have been one of those children. My parents were, they, they worked extra jobs, but they made sure we always could afford lunch. But I remember friends who couldn't. And unfortunately, this remains a scourge in our country. 1 in 5 children, 1 out of every 5 goes hungry and faces food insecurity. And it's a solvable problem, especially using our schools. And yet we've got governors in 10 to 15 states who are refusing to accept taxpayer dollars. We've already put the money into the system.
Federal
All
tax
federal tax dollars. So
dollars,
you've
no
already paid
less.
for it.
Right.
All they have to do is accept the money so they can feed children during the summer. And Governor Kemp here in Georgia, the governor of Mississippi, states that have some of the highest poverty rates among children said no. And here in Georgia, he said, oh, well, it's not sustainable and it's not nutritionally sound. If you've ever been hungry, number one, your goal is to solve the hunger immediately. And you've got time to make it sustainable. You have time to do everything else you want. You can find a way to feed children. But to refuse to accept those resources, I think, is unconscionable. But I also know that for children, it's something like that that feels very accessible. They know kids in their schools, unfortunately, who are going hungry. And I wanted to tell a story about a big topic that little kids could understand. I wanted to create a space for empathy and advocacy. This isn't a political book, and I don't want people to think this is about proselytizing to children. It's about giving children the sense of their own power, that they have the right to see something that looks unfair, to say something, and if the adults in their world won't fix it, to try to nudge them along. And so little Stacy and her friends, when they confront this moment, when Stacy confronts it and her stomach is wobbly because she feels like she should have done something in that moment, she's got to figure out what else she can do. And she can't just hope the adults fix the problem, because I want kids to understand that they have the right to want to make things better. And sometimes you can't wait for the adults to get around to the work.
Yeah, and such an important. I mean, there's so many things that I feel we don't actually end up teaching in schools that are so important and that really do shape the course and trajectory of lives. I grew up with a single mom, and at times we were on welfare and on food stamps and even homeless at times. And when I was in first grade, a kid in my class noticed just how little we had. I had a conversation with him about Christmas, and my mom had said maybe we would just, you know, make each other some little things this year because she didn't have any money to buy anything for us. He noticed that. He noticed this kid in his class who was in need, went home, told his mother. His mother gave my mother $100 to go buy Christmas presents for me and my little brother. And the thing about that was that I'm still talking about it now. The
Yeah.
thing about that little event, that seemingly small gesture, that moment of paying attention and being empathetic and noticing someone else in need, that was on the forefront of my mind when I started my nonprofit 30 years later.
Yeah.
And it impacts the people who bear witness to those incidents and who are beneficiaries. And I think that it's important to remember that small acts can, down the road, have a really big impact. And likewise, that applies to voting. You know, people could choose to just do the minimum amount and turn up at the polls themselves and cast their ballot and pay attention to what issues are on the ballot. But a little bit of effort persuading 1 or 2 or 5 friends to make sure that they show up at the polls as well, that could mean the difference between having a neo-fascist president and having somebody who really cares about children and working people. I mean, I think it's also quite. I think you didn't see this coming when you wrote the book, but Tim
Yeah.
Walz as governor of Minnesota, implemented a program where
Exactly.
it's free school lunch for every public school student. An incredibly, I think that that's such a lovely policy. As a kid who was recipient of free lunches when I was in elementary school, there was shame attached to that.
Absolutely.
The way my school processed that, they made it very clear to all of the other students that I was one of the kids getting the free lunch because I was one
Exactly.
of the poor kids. And to eliminate that us and them division in schools is a wonderful thing and a policy. But anyway, the point is
Yeah.
we could have a president and a vice president who advocate for policies like that, or we can have one who advocates for tax cuts for Elon Musk and his cronies.
You're
So I think it's a pretty clear choice.
no, I think your story is so emblematic of why this matters, because someone who took the time to see you and serve you and your brother helped create someone who's willing to do more and who has been willing to be incredibly ambitious and thoughtful. It's one of the reasons for me the story is so important, because while we didn't have to, we weren't on school lunch, we were on welfare at one point. Like, it happens, and there's such a stigma attached to need that makes no sense in a society that can do better by its people. But it's also why voting, we've got to vote for President Harris, we've got to vote for Vice President Walz, but we've also got to go all the way down the ballot, because the failure to get free school lunch, it, so Vice President Harris and President Biden they signed the law that says this money can come to us. It's governors and state legislators who are saying no. It's school boards that are charging children and saying you have to, as it happens in the book, telling a 6-year-old, your mommy didn't pay the bill, so you've got to get out of line and put your food back. Like, that moment of, no matter why you have to do it, that moment of stigma sticks with a child. And
Oh,
that's a child who could do so many
totally.
wonderful things. And it also, to me, it's a waste of human capital. It is deeply inefficient, because children who are well fed are well read. They are engaged. They can pay attention. If what we want, if worst case scenario, if what you want is the most able bodied, engaged citizenship, that happens when you actually feed the body and the mind while they're at school. And so I've never understood why we would deny, especially our children, access to food and access to healthcare. That's the easiest job we've got. And it's folks like you who prove that I'm right.
Yeah, well, I don't think we need much proof that you're right. Stacey, thank you. Thank you for writing this lovely book. Everyone, please go
Thank you.
buy it. And you know what, Stacey, you just mentioned one more thing. Maybe you can point to another nationwide resource that's your favorite, because I know there are a lot of websites for this, but people often ask me for information. There's a lot to parse out on a given ballot when you go to the polls. There are, school boards in some places. You don't know whether the candidates are Republican or Democratic because of state laws. And then there's lots of ballot initiatives and bond measures and things like that. So there's a lot for people to understand, and sometimes it seems like it's a little bit too tricky to pour through. Are there online resources that you can point people to for getting good information
So,
there?
so I would start with I Will Vote. That the I Will Vote universe, just Google I Will Vote. They will often direct you to other places, mainly because we've got 50 states, we've got 3,000 counties, we've got more than 5,000 cities and towns, and almost all of them have elections. So there is no one centralized source, but that's a great place to start. If you have an indivisible chapter where you live, they often put that information out. The League of Women Voters does a great job of giving
Yeah,
you
that's
just
the
good
resource that I've
information.
used for the most
Yeah, and
part.
so the new president actually she used to work with me at the state capitol in Georgia. It's a nonpartisan organization, so they'll tell you both sides of the ballot, and if you're lucky enough to have more than two parties, all sides of the ballot. But the League of Women Voters is a fantastic resource for nonpartisan information about almost everything that you need to know, and they will take you to other resources. But don't let not knowing stop you from being engaged. A lot of us don't vote if we can't answer every question. The other guys vote no matter what. So we've got to go all the way down the ballot. Think of it like the Apple Care contract that you sign, you want to read all of the fine print. When it comes to your ballot, read all the way down to the bottom, because everything we need is on that ballot if we want to build a better America, a better community, and if we want more Misha Collinses out in the world.
Stacey, thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to seeing what you do next. Is there anything else that you want to pass on to folks before you go?
I do. So, in addition to writing, I am a huge proponent of reading. This is Banned Books Week. And so I encourage everyone. I have a new podcast called Assembly Required with Stacey Abrams. And our special guest this week is none other than LeVar Burton,
Awesome.
who is on to talk about the right to read and why banned books are a scourge in our society. And again, it starts where our schools are. So if you want to visit my podcast, Assembly Required with Stacey Abrams, would love to have you guys listen to it, talk about banned books, make sure this book doesn't get banned, and make sure we verify, we volunteer, we go visible, and we get to voting.
Thank you.
Thank you, my
So
friend.
nice to see you.
You as well.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.